I thank all the panel, Dr. Diaa and Dr. Alaa, of course, and for inviting me definitely to come into this important forum. We all suffer one way or the other from the increase of prices. The paper, as we saw, mentioned two main reasons, that there are structural reasons and institutional reforms, and to rectify this situation there are a lot of factors. I agree for these two factors, but not in the same way to be classified as the paper mentioned. The paper highlighted the fiscal deficit, and this is one point that comes through the market discipline, not through the fiscal rules, but through the industrial discipline and the productive aspect of the Egyptian government to encourage the private system and the like. But there is a lag between the steps undertaken by the government and the output or the effect. Some external factors also come into perspective and push the decision maker to see that this is the best position, that Egypt in a very limited time has to wait for a long time to have luxury. And all these points or assumptions, it might be right, time will tell us if this is right or not, but the problem comes from the response of the productive sector. It will take time, and there are certain external problems which has nothing to do with the efforts of the money. The monetary growth and the structural reform are very much in demand, but they have a lot to do with the fiscal discipline. The problem comes from financing the deficit. The central bank could not control this, and there is a fiscal dominance. Also, this is a fact. The central bank policy is affiliated to the fiscal position required from the government or by the government, and it is direct orders that there must be a coverage for this deficit. What is really weird is that the inflation targeting in most of the countries becomes from 0, like Japan, to 3, United States, UK, Germany, and other industrial countries. We have it 13. The central bank put it 13. For me, it's a bit funny. If someone from abroad saw this, they will think that whether we are serious, they will think if we are really serious about these numbers. We don't have yet the tools. So this as to price variability and the fluctuations that were discussed are present, but the reason not because of interaction in the market, but because of the adjustment that takes place in the prices. 60% of fixing the prices, and in a little short time the decision maker just saw that this is the best time for Egypt to make to make up for this 60 years, so he started pushing hard. I don't know if this is right or wrong. Again, time will tell us, but we don't know what is to be happening next. Let's wait and see. If we follow this trend, what has been said is if it would be difficult to go for longer like this. And I also mentioned the institutional reform, which has a lot to do with competitiveness and the anti-monopolization policies and so on. This is a bit forgotten in Egypt, or maybe is not paid attention to enough. This won't come unless there is a development in the productive tools, where we can then see price control and real competition in the market. This research also has very good statistical work. Dr. Diaa and his team really had an outstanding work where somebody else can come and pick the thread. I really have to give them the right because they did a lot of efforts. It is a very good start. And I think that the paper also is discussing the supply shocks and the price uncertainty that is the result of these supply shocks. And the other part, of course, is determined by the price adjustment. If there are more information about the structural breaks or better dealing with the structural breaks in a different way, this means that it's like stop and go policy. So I think in a different stage this might give better, or let's say different results. Another point that I'm putting into consideration and what was not very clear to me, maybe Dr. Diaa and the team would comment here, the model took into consideration all these shocks, and they confirmed that if we exclude this, we will be able to know the reasons for the price variability. But at the very end, he found the same reasons, which are the fiscal budget problems and the inflation pressures that's coming from the monetary growth and the institutional factors, the fiscal rules, and so on, and the exchange rate and the other variables were the model handled. So in spite of the fact that these are controlled, the explanation did not come except from the factors that we claimed that we neutralized or control it. Yes, we did so, but it's the same point. So I think that after control of the structural reforms, there must be a lacking factor to contribute to the whole thing. I also want to confirm that the monetary growth and inflation, I believe inflation is a monetary phenomena which will not be developed before control is exerted, control concerning, of course, the deficit of the budget. And by the way, this will happen. The governmental revenues are really going upward, and expenditure will be controlled in the next period. However, it's not very obvious in, for example, the tariffs are very high, and the state is saying that the private sector is also working hard, and the country also is preserving the assets. But point is, any governmental service person or whoever receive this, they know that they are paying very high expenses, which are very implicit in the finishing up of the papers and so on. So this gives the country a lot of money and gives the state a lot of chances to expand. But the tax collection and the productive sectors concerning direct revenues didn't yet reach what we want. It's 22%, but the real rate is much more than that in the other sectors. This is very important point, and I think that this paper opens the way for transitions. Dr. Diaa mentioned something important, and maybe he'd like to comment the management of this transformation. And what are the toolkit? What is the toolkit? I do think it should be something out of the box and not only replicating other countries. It has to be exclusively and customized in an Egyptian way. How can I make this transition in short time? How can I make use of the factors and the circumstances with the least losses? I don't think this is very clear in the governmental policy. There might be some external points that are not of great help to the Egyptian government. I think I enjoyed very much the research, and this is what we can say the talk of the town, and thanks a lot for inviting me. Lots of thanks, Dr. Alaa. Of course, comments concerning the model will be answered by Dr. Diaa. I agree that the targeting of 13% inflation was very high, but I do have some differences with you, so I'll have high blood pressure if you don't mention certain things. It's better to mention them. The FDI, they have problems, and yes, the FGI, one of the problems is that our business environment is still not that good. We have permanent problems. We deal with investment in general through the laws that fast track for certain people, although of course the main point is that we should amend the whole system, and that is one of the causes of the problem. We're trying to correct 60 years mistakes and problems of long heritage of problems. We have been reaching a poverty rate of 30%. There is a problem, so I don't think we are going well. No, we are not going well. Yeah, we can go slowly. We can do things gradually. Definitely, revenues are increasing, and but definitely there are certain pressures concerning the fees. We really want the expenditure. Yeah, I know that our expenditure could be reviewed and prioritized in a certain way to put it in the education sector, the health insurance sectors, and so on. But we also should go in the direction of rectifying and amending the markets. In my personal opinion, I salute Dr. Diaa. This price variability is not only that we administratively put the price, especially that each sector has a different price, so we don't have transparency, we don't have data availability, and therefore the market is just a bit chaotic. If I organize and discipline the market, I think this will be very important reforms. Dr. Diaa, in not more than limited minutes, so that we give time for questions and answers. A lot of thanks. Of course, I thank the panel so much. All the ideas that you've presented are very valuable. But in a nutshell, I start to answer some of the points. I will start as Dr. Omar mentioned. Yes, there is a lot of differences in the figures of GDP and the inflation. I didn't look into details, but maybe the reason is that I'm speaking about inflation based on the CPI, but this relationship is based on the producer price index, PPI. If I speak about the relative price, I of course prefer that I would have the data of the PPI, but I don't have it. I agree with you. The second point, which is important, is the importance of the independence and the autonomy of the central bank. This is indisputable, of course, but I would just like to say that today the world is witnessing an interest trend in 13 April in the Economist. There is a lot of additional concerning the central bank autonomy and independence. Trump in the States is depending on the Federal Reserve and has put a threat that he's going to get two on the board members, the Bank of England, by the same token. Concerning the Brexit is following the same route. In India, also they replaced one of the big hits in the bank. Turkey also the same. So yes, it's being tested. So, and the reason is that the political pressures are increasing. We wanted the central bank to be divorced from these pressures, and it happened in a lot of countries. Well, that's important, but what is really indisputable is that there is a relationship, and a strong one, between the autonomy and the independence of the central bank and the other outputs. This is, we can't differ on that. The most important thing that mentioned by Dr. Omar But I'll come to that point. The exchange rate is relative, although administratively we did come in. It's the ratio of the price of non-tradables for tradables. That is the economic theory, but we had to get into this issue administratively, and we tried to find some disalignment between the real price and the price of the market, and the results were not good. I mean, we are asking questions like we don't know the answers, but we know the answers, and the answers are comprehensible. Of course, I know the paper is confirming the obvious. Even in the introduction, we said that we want to instruct the narrative. We don't want to be there and just accepting that we must be facing this inflation. It's inevitable and so on. But there are other forces. So I agree with you, definitely. I agree with you. Concerning, there is another very important point, and Dr. Abla mentioned. The response was through increasing the interest rate after the floating of the pound. We've got to think in a different way concerning the monetary tools. I know that the response is not necessarily or will not necessarily be solved through increasing the interest rate, especially that we did this 7%. Point is that when I increase the rate, I have to lessen the demand for credit. But did this decrease the demand? No. The result was that the interest payment, if in governmental expenditure, started to move from 26 to 36. Now here the fiscal rules are important. If the fiscal rules were in place, the government would have been able not to decrease the deficit from 12 to 9, but it would have been to bring it down to 5%. That would only have happened if we did have a sort of fiscal rules. The other point that's very important, in 2017 we had a seminar, and we called for an increase from 10 to 17 the reserve. The reserve factors are very important for sterilization policy. How can we deal with the cash flows? That's not an easy problem. If I make some sterilization, the exchange rate will be affected. If I have 25 billion or the same, that represents more than 5% of the GDP, it should resonate in the exchange rate. But if I need the exchange rate to be stable, then I have to go into the sterilization. I just want to say sterilization is not a piece of cake. It's not an easy way. Each route does have their pluses and minuses. I'm going to get into another liberalization price concerning wages. We've put ourselves in a position where I have a high inflation, and that this inflation is the tax that I'm imposing on people. 2017 was inflation tax. If I change the tax, whether the inflation would be inflation or direct, this would be debatable. But the development of wage growth in Egypt is very limited. My nephew is working in one of the best private banks. For a long years, his nominal wage is less than the minimum wage in the States by far margin. And yes, there is a problem, but the problem is related to a lot of factors like unionization and productivity and the relationship between wages increase and productivity. This wouldn't be fixed unless I have low and stable inflation. If I'm living in the UK or in the in the United States, I could go to the syndicate and just complain that the inflation is 30% and that my salary is increased in a very little percentage. I could do that, but I mean that's in other countries where the economy is stable. But there's another point, is that CPI inflation, does it represent certain points. No, this is based on the information of expenditures of 2009. Any family with a higher salaries or income more than 4,000 would be considered of the high income. So let's say all of us in this hall are the richest. We are filthy rich, according to that determines. I know the numbers. The numbers are not. They should be more controlled. How much money was created? I'll answer by this example. In 2013, we have 3.4 compared to the 2013 rate. This answers your question. In 3 or 4 or 5 years, this is a catastrophic increase. How these data issues affect me? I should have a plan for the inflation targeting, but inflation targeting has requirements. It has statistical requirements. The GDP data should be available in real time for me to take the decision, but I'm shooting arrows in the dark, like they used to say. I'm doing it. We don't even know whether the output is positive or negative. So in any other country, this factor might have been significant, but I measure it here in the wrong way because I don't have the supporting data. So we do need a lot of tools. Last but not least, Dr. Alaa mentioned the competition and regulation. That's very important, I agree. But we want to move into a free market pricing, which we don't mean that prices will be flat. In any country in the main sectors like transportation and health, yes, there is price regulation. In England, for example, I lived there a lot. The private companies cannot raise the tickets prices even with small percentage, but their expenditure increased to 31%. So they will just increase it 2 or 3%. But today there are certain companies that can raise the prices magnificently high. On the supply side, there is a lag of response. I claim that these two variables do have a lot of effect. I know that the RPV reflects a certain image, and of course we have the highest inflation rate in a developing country. Developing countries put certain higher inflation rate because they are going through transition. 13%, this is a catastrophic communication on the part of the central bank. They should have taken this target and bring it down, but there is complete silence on the part of the central bank. And to checks, we can see that there is some stability. Yes, I know there is. We can never find econometric measurements that are perfect, but our econometrical checks have been done in the case of how to manage in transformation. That's very important. And this needs, of course, corporate consensus because it will incur costs, and the costs will be different according to the different sectors of society. But we should have a blueprint as the starting point, or what we can call a master plan. I hope that Vision 2030 would have been better than that, and it was a document that was inappropriate to Egypt. It's not being planned on the part of the Ministry of Planning. I don't know how version 2 will come, but what I said in a meeting, that the vision doesn't need details. It doesn't need, for example, a target growth of 10%, which we'll never see. That's beside the point. All what it needs is a consensus concerning the institutional reform in Egypt. Now, my bet is my children. I bet on my children. the outputs can change, and there are business cycles. But if I want to see improvement in the output, I should make a good and strong and solid institutional reform. Yes, there are lessons to be learned. I know Egypt has its special case. I know there must be customization to Egypt, but I cannot imagine Egypt in an isolated position. It's enough we have been far away from all or most of the best practices. We've got to get back to them.